Today's podcast of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. So I hope that everybody who celebrated Halloween had a great time. I certainly did. And now that Halloween and Day of the Dead are over, the USA and parts of Europe are bracing ourselves for this year's Christmas season. Even during October, you can see Christmas decorations creeping into the department store aisles while the Halloween department shrinks. I always look at Halloween as the last defense against the Christmas season. As Halloween adults, we hold the mistletoe and the garland at bay. Like Ben holds the farmhouse door shut against the zombies in Night of the Living Dead. But inevitably, the door bursts open and the infestation of the holiday season starts. Now, I'm not all bah humbug. I like the holiday sentiment. But the advertising of the holidays is the aggressive infestation that coats everything. Signs for holiday sales pop up on every store and every billboard like parasitic plants that grow out of trees. Mistletoe is a parasitic plant, by the way. But there's another type of sign that starts popping up a lot during the holiday season. That one says, "Get your flu shot here." Now, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, those signs start popping up in the late summer, but they come out in full force when the Christmas season starts, because the health professionals know that we're about to start having a lot of gatherings. Some will be with family. Some will be with coworkers at parties, but many will be unplanned gatherings that you get trapped in with strangers. If you're in a metropolitan area, the subways and the trains will be packed to capacity. If you shop anywhere in the USA, you will be elbow to elbow with shoppers in checkout lines. If you go to the butcher for that ham or turkey or tofurkey, you'll be surrounded by people and refrigeration cases that are going full blast. And in all those situations, just when you're starting to feel claustrophobic, you'll hear a sound, a cough, or maybe a sneeze. And when that happens, what's your first thought? Is that person sick? Are they the only one here that's sick? Did I wipe down this shopping basket before I picked it up? How many times have I touched my face since I've been here, since I left my house, since I last washed my hands? Do you know that the average person touches their face 2,000 to 3,000 times a day? Tidings of comfort and joy indeed. Now, companies offer free flu shots to their employees. Health plans give the flu shot free to their members. Foundations make flu shots free to the elderly and to children and to veterans. Benevolent organizations go into poor neighborhoods to give free shots. And Costco gives a shot for $14.99. And yet, in the last flu season, less than half of the U.S. population got the flu shot, and nearly 20% of the U.S. population got the flu, and over 200,000 got hospitalized for it. See, we no longer have personal stories of people we knew who died of influenza or entire families that got wiped out. But our grandparents probably do, and certainly our great-grandparents did. Because this is a relatively new modern convenience, not dying from influenza. The weird byproduct of that success and the convenience of a possible prevention is skepticism. Our lives aren't threatened, and so many of us assume that we've somehow tamed influenza. Even worse, when we hear of a possible outbreak of a new strain and people don't die like they were supposed to, many people think the CDC is overreacting. And the single most common reason I hear why people don't get the shot? It's a waste of money. It doesn't always work. There's no guarantee you won't get the flu. And they're right, of course. The effectiveness varies from year to year and can be anywhere from 40% to 90% effective. But you know what's terrifying about that? They never ask why. Why does the effectiveness fluctuate so much? Of course, I'm not here to just talk about the flu. There are far, far more disturbing things out there. Let's talk about body horror. I mean the real stuff. Now, when body horror gets mentioned, the first name that people think of is director David Cronenberg, who made it popular in the horror film. But body horror is much older than that. The story of Job in the Old Testament is full-on body horror with boils from head to toe. In the book of Revelation, the first horseman of the apocalypse is pestilence, plague. And Edgar Allan Poe created the Masque of the Red Death, and that was inspired by the Black Plague. Disease was personified as a living thing long before there was a microscope. When H.P. Lovecraft wrote about cosmic horror, he discussed how insignificant mankind was to the universe and how there were elder gods who were indifferent to whether we lived or died. A careless swipe of one of Cthulhu's tentacles can vaporize a galaxy. Yes, cosmic horror. But let's talk microcosmic horror, where the elder gods are real. Because in real life, we are surrounded by ancient entities that could kill us before we even knew what happened. Did I say surround? That's not quite accurate, because they are also on our bodies. Even worse than that, they are inside our bodies. Wait, it's even creepier than that. There are so many of them. The number of their cells is greater than the number of your own human cells that make up your body. Microbes, single-cell organisms, bacteria and fungi and protozoa and viruses, the real elder gods. They are the oldest forms of life on the earth. They were around billions of years before there were dinosaurs. Without them, we would die. Without us, they'd probably be just fine. It's the microbes' world. We're just living in it. Now, I'm not a germaphobe. On the contrary, I have a real fascination and respect for the microscopic world because I know, for the most part, microbes are the good guys. Microbes are nature's recycling machine, and they make the nitrogen that builds new life. If you like breathing, thank the microbe for creating half of the oxygen we've got. If you like eating, thank the microbes that live in your gut. About 3 pounds of them, by the way. Now, the point is, we have a symbiotic existence with most of the microbes, but not all of them. And when humans cross paths with those creatures, the result is devastation so horrible and so complete, you can hear the hooves of the first horseman. These body horror stories are terrifying because they are all true. So, I have this scar on my body that gives away my age. Almost everyone my age has this scar, no matter where in the developed world they lived as a kid. It's a circular indentation about the size of a nickel on my left shoulder. And people from the generations after me do not have this scar. It is a war wound. It is from when we battled an unseen force so deadly that the entire civilized world took a chance and injected a separate virus into their children to try and kill it off. That unseen force was smallpox. What was smallpox? It starts out like the flu. You're sick, your muscles ache, you have a fever. However, by the time you get those symptoms, the virus has attacked your lymph nodes. It's in your spleen. It's in your bone marrow. It's everywhere. And then come the blisters, the pox. It covers the entire body, including the tongue and any mucous membranes. Those blisters pop, and the pus mixes with saliva. And then, with one cough, it is airborne. If you were lucky, you just had horrible scarring and blindness. If you were unlucky, it went hemorrhagic, and you bled out under your skin and into your organs, and you died. Smallpox was estimated to have killed 300 to 500 million people in the 20th century. In 1967 alone, 15 million people, many of them children, contracted smallpox, and 2 million of them died. And that was the year that worldwide inoculations began by injecting a less dangerous virus called vaccinia into the children. That jump-started the immune system to fight smallpox. And that worldwide vaccination from 1967 until 1972 eradicated smallpox from the planet. It was the first and only time a human infectious disease was ever declared extinct. Of course, that means everything else I'm going to talk about still walks the earth. These outbreaks can happen again at any time. It just takes the right conditions. And what are the right conditions? Well, that's anybody's guess. If you're under 30 and you hear the word apocalypse, the first thing you probably think of is the zombie apocalypse of The Walking Dead. It's a pretty horrible vision, but it is a vision that keeps the apocalypse at arm's length. What do I mean? I mean, for that apocalypse to happen, the dead would have to rise and eat the living, which has never happened before. Not saying it'll never happen, but the odds aren't great. So since this apocalypse requires a leap of faith, there's a distance from real-world anxiety. As a kid of the 1970s, I had a different version of how the apocalypse would happen, and it was neck-deep in the anxieties of reality. In the 1970s, when I was a kid, there was concern about the threat of nuclear war, that someone in power could be crazy enough to push the button and end it all. In Four Horsemen terminology, this is the red horse, the second horseman, war. But in 1978, Stephen King gave us what I consider the gold standard of apocalyptic tales. The Stand is his magnum opus. See, he didn't see the world ending with a bang from a clash of power-mad egos who burn the world down. It won't be anything so dramatic in his mind. He saw the world ending with a whimper, by accident, through a mistake. In his story, the apocalypse is started by a superflu known as Captain Trips. This superflu is a biological weapon that's held in a secluded army base, and it is accidentally released. And even though the base goes into lockdown to contain the disease, a soldier and his family escape by car, and they drive for help. And they are contagious. And this starts a pandemic that quickly kills 99.4% of the human population of the world. Now, Stephen King had his fingers on the pulse of the anxieties of that time, because in 1968 there was an accidental release of a nerve agent from an army base in Utah. It killed 6,000 sheep at nearby ranches. If the wind blew in the other direction, it would have hit Salt Lake City. And in 1976, a mysterious respiratory disease was killing men who attended an American Legion convention in a Philadelphia hotel. There was panic that it might be a swine flu epidemic in a city of 2 million people. It was found to be a bacterium that was breeding in the hotel's air conditioning system. So basically, mistakes and negligence were in the air. Now, normally, influenza is only fatal if you're an infant or you're elderly or your immune system is compromised already. So Stephen King created a fictional superflu for his novel, one that was created in a lab that could kill even the healthiest adults. You know, he didn't need to go to all that trouble, because in 1918, an unusually deadly superflu spread across the world, and nobody knew how to stop it. This flu wasn't engineered in a laboratory. All that was needed were the right conditions, and the microbes did the rest. The 1918 flu pandemic may have killed more people than the Black Plague did in 2 years. The Black Plague was around for 7 years. In 2 years, the 1918 influenza killed off 3 to 5% of the world's human population, and it infected 500 million people. Now, there were a lot less people back then, only about 2 billion people on the planet, which means 25%, 1/4 of the human race, was sick and at risk of dying. And yet, I'm aware that you might only vaguely know about this, or this might be the first time you're hearing about the 1918 pandemic. For some reason, war ages well in history and memories. We remember the Red Horse, but natural disasters, not so much. The White Horse fades. And yet, war is one of the key conditions that allowed the disease to become a pandemic. It did so in a couple of ways. 1918 was the last year of World War I, which was known for trench warfare. Entire squadrons of men would live and die in mud-filled trenches. They were also malnourished and already had weakened immune systems. When one infected person sneezes or coughs, 500,000 virus particles go into the air and are breathed in by anybody close by. Yeah, it was in a trench, right? The consensus is that ground zero was in France at a major troop and hospital staging area. It started as a virus in birds, and then it mutated and it jumped to pigs, which were kept near the front for food. And then it jumped to humans. And those humans jumped on boats, or they marched across Europe, or they got wounded and they were sent back to hospitals overseas. The first cases of this influenza in the USA was at Fort Riley, Kansas in January of 1918, right smack dab in the center of the country. But there was another way that the war created the perfect conditions for this outbreak: censorship. To keep morale up, wartime censors minimized reports on the spread of illness and death in Germany, and in Britain, and in France, and in the United States. However, Spain was neutral, so all the papers were free to report on fatalities in Spain. This gave people the wrong impression that the worst of it was in Spain. And that's how it got a nickname that you might know: the Spanish flu. At first, the flu acted just like any other flu, except it spread faster. Most of the fatalities were the elderly or infants or those already sick. But then it changed again. And this second wave could have killed us all. The second wave was killing the young and the healthy. This wave of the virus caused what is known as a cytokine storm. It uses the body's own immune system against it until it kills. So the healthier the immune system, the worse things got. Healthy people were dying just hours after they showed symptoms, and they died horribly. They bled from the mouth and their nose and their ears, and blood filled their stomachs and in their intestines and their lungs. These weren't normal flu symptoms, so there was misdiagnosis of cholera or typhoid. And this flu had a 50% infection rate. So if there were 4 people in a room, 2 got it. Now imagine what happened to society when 25% of the world got really, really sick or died. Rural communities disappeared. In the cities, many of the doctors and nurses were overseas in the war, so hospitals fell apart. The doctors and the police who were still there got sick and died along with everyone else. People were dying so fast and at such volume that there were no more caskets. Bodies were buried in mass graves, open pits covered over by steam shovels. The dying had to drag the dead bodies of their family members out on their porches. The alleys were now the morgues, and orphans roamed the streets in packs. Communities declared martial law and gatherings were outlawed. Handshakes were illegal. In San Francisco, you weren't allowed outside unless you wore a gauze mask, which was useless against this flu. And believe it or not, even with all of this happening, there were lots of people who pretended that the pandemic didn't exist. There was a mass rally of 200,000 people in Philadelphia to sell war bonds. 12,000 of them died. Other people blamed it all on terrorism, that the Germans went up the coast with their new U-boats and released the flu. There was paranoia, there was suspicion, and there was violence. What there wasn't was a cure. The Spanish flu had its way with the world. There was no reasoning with it. There was no pity given, no mercy shown. The Spanish flu was an indifferent god. And then, just as the pandemic was reaching its peak and its highest weekly death tolls, it just stopped. There was no 11th hour cure or antidote invented by scientists. The pandemic ended itself. We had nothing to do with it. The theory is that the flu mutated once again, and this time into a less lethal strain. So, could the Spanish flu pandemic happen again? The actual Spanish flu, the same microbe? Probably not. Researchers have created some antiviral serums that would certainly help. But another flu that mutates into something else? Right now, researchers are worried about the recent avian flu in Southeast Asia. You know, the one you heard all the jokes about? It seems to have a lot of similarities to the Spanish flu, including killing the healthy. And it just seems to be getting stronger. So you wake up in the morning and you feel a little out of sorts. Your throat is sore. You have a little headache. You start making breakfast, but you realize you don't have an appetite. You check your forehead. You might have a slight fever. And that's it. Sucks having a cold, right? And then you go to bed. However, what you don't know is that while you sleep, something is slowly, quietly killing your T lymphocyte cells, the weapons of your immune system. Now, this is what HIV does, but what you have is not HIV. HIV is hard to spread without intimate physical contact, sex. What you have, on the other hand, is highly contagious. Right now. Even in this early symptom that feels like a cold. If you are in bed with someone, they are already infected and may die soon. If there is anyone in your house, they are in mortal danger as well. And then you wake up. Now, your entire body aches all over, and your fever is hot, and your stomach and abdomen are in constant cramping. And you start to have diarrhea. And then you throw up. And now you know you're in trouble. Is this a bad flu? Is it food poisoning? You think back on what you might have eaten over the last couple of days. But what you have could have been with you for the last 21 days. And you've been leaking contamination into the air everywhere you go. The least of your worries is what you've eaten. It's more what's eating you. Now, over the next few days, you realize it isn't food poisoning. Things get no better. This is agony. But don't worry. Within the next week, it'll all be over. Because one of two things will happen. Either your symptoms will gradually lessen and you'll recover, or there will be the whir of the mother of all cytokine storms starting in your body. Your immune system is out of control and is ready to kill you. The T cells pour inflammatory molecules, chemicals that used to fight pathogens, into your circulatory system. And now they see your red blood cells as the enemy, and they pop your red blood cells like carbonated soda bubbles. They attack every organ in your body, blowing the cells to pieces. Blood blisters rise on your skin. The whites of your eyes go crimson. Inside, you are liquefying. And then, you void everything that used to be on the inside from every orifice. You have become a toxic soup full of Ebola virus that is now on the prowl for the next host. The scariest novel I ever read was The Exorcist. It was a work of fiction. The scariest work of nonfiction I ever read was The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. It was the first time I ever heard the word Ebola. I wouldn't forget it. It is the stuff of true nightmares. And like a nightmare, its origin is still shrouded in mystery. It's theorized that Ebola jumped from fruit bats and infected humans by way of a bite or unsanitary living conditions around bat guano. They found the infection in bats, but they've never isolated the actual virus in them. So we don't know its host. We don't know how it survives when there isn't an outbreak, because it kills everything it's in. It's as if the virus just floated out of the depths of the jungle in the Congo, and then it returns there when it's done feasting. The first case of Ebola was in 1976, and at first it was misdiagnosed as malaria. But it became apparent this was not malaria, and that first outbreak killed 431 people. And after that, Ebola went back into the jungle. It seemed like this freak virus just burned itself out. It's not uncommon for very dangerous hemorrhagic virus outbreaks to just burn themselves out. It's the only good thing about them. And then, in 1979, in the Sudan, it came back, and 22 people died. The next outbreak wasn't until 1994. Once again, the virus seemed to burn out. Now, the thing about Ebola is that it has a 90% fatality rate, which means it doesn't spread easily. Nobody lives long enough to get too far. But then it mutated. The deadliest outbreak of Ebola lasted from 2013 to 2016, and it killed 11,310 people. It appeared in West Africa, far away from its normal location in the Congo. A theory on how it got there was it followed health workers traveling to villages giving aid. And in West Africa, the borders are very porous, and there's heavy traffic from Guinea to Sierra Leone to Liberia. Ebola found its way out of the jungle. It found a way to spread. It started in villages in Guinea. And then someone from those villages went to the capital city of Guinea and got sick. And they ended up in the hospital. And the mutated virus jumped to the doctors and the nurses. And what was scary was that Ebola mutated every time it jumped from person to person. And in those mutations, it didn't get people sick immediately. It let them travel to places like Liberia before it erupted. And someone in Liberia got on a plane to the United States. And on September 15th, 2014, Ebola landed in Dallas, Texas. On September 28th, Thomas Eric Duncan of Liberia was diagnosed as the first Ebola patient in the United States at Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital. He was soon followed by patient number 2 and patient number 3, his nurses. Duncan died of the disease, but the 2 nurses were spared. And then, on October 23rd, 2014, a doctor in New York City was diagnosed with the 4th case of Ebola in the United States. This doctor had been treating Ebola patients in Sierra Leone, working with Doctors Without Borders. An early diagnosis saved him. In the end, there were 11 cases of Ebola in the United States, with only 2 fatalities. it seems to have burned itself out. Right? Now, these elder gods are most certainly alive, but they are not sentient. Even though it might feel that way, it almost feels devious how easily they capitalize on our human nature. But really, they're just following the path that's given them. If you are the oldest life form on the earth, you know exactly what it takes to adapt. These elder gods only do one thing: survive. And when we come face to face with the pure force of survival in nature, we are not prepared. It is very rare for us to be able to feel any kind of victory with disease. Most of the time, we just get out by the skin of our teeth. And even when we seem to succeed, the elder gods strike back. What do I mean by that? Here's an example. Antibiotics. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, and he revolutionized medicine in the 20th century. Antibiotics battled bacterial infections that helped curtail tuberculosis and other diseases. We finally had miracle drugs. But they were so effective and so easy to get access to that they became overused and misused. And the bacteria adapted. And just like Stephen King's The Stand, we created a new beast in the lab. Methicillin-Resistant Staphylococcus Aureus, Mrsa for short. Mrsa was discovered in hospitals and prisons and nursing homes. In other words, it thrived in places where there were a lot of antibiotics that were supposed to be the cure. People would go to the hospital for another ailment and contract Mrsa while they were there. This super bacteria is responsible for many difficult-to-cure infections, and one of the problems is that it looks like a regular bacterial infection, so the doctor will prescribe an antibiotic. The horror is that it thrives on antibiotics. The cure makes it stronger, and it can be fatal. And then it jumped from hospitals into communities and into livestock. In 2005, I developed what I thought was a boil on the upper part of the back of my leg. All right, it was my ass. I thought I had a boil on my ass. It was the size of a big pimple, and it hurt a lot, like there was a lot of pressure there. I figured it needed draining, so I did a lot of soaking, all the stuff you do to bring it to a head. But it wouldn't come to a head. This was on a Friday, so I figured I'd take it easy over the weekend and I'd soak until I succeeded. On Saturday, it was noticeably bigger, and I was having a hard time sitting down. By Sunday, it was the size of a golf ball, and I was in agony. I went to the hospital to get the damn thing lanced. The nurse looked at me disapprovingly and asked me why I waited so long. She was surprised to find out it was only 72 hours since the first blemish. The doctor looked at it and he told me immediately, "This is not a boil. This is a bacterial infection." So he gave me a prescription for an antibiotic. I took them that night and I went to sleep. When I woke up, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had small red blemishes covering my legs and my arms, right where my veins were. These little infections were tracing my bloodstream. I went back to the doctor, who was shocked and a little shaken. "Sir, it looks like you've got a case of Mrsa." Now, in 2005, Mrsa wasn't widely known outside of hospital professionals. He let me know that antibiotics weren't going to work. So he tried what doctors used to give before penicillin was invented. He gave me sulfa drugs, old school shit. They worked like a charm, and I was clear within a few days. However, the original boil took a chunk of me with it. I looked like I got shot until it healed over. And I know I dodged a bullet. I occasionally read about people dying from Mrsa. And this is the big, bad, scary new elder god that capitalized on our mistakes. The World Health Organization has gone on the record saying Mrsa is a serious threat that is no longer a prediction for the future. It is happening right now in every region of the world and has a potential to affect anyone of any age in any country. Because what do we do if our miracle drugs no longer work? I mentioned that war ages well in history and memories. We remember the Red Horse. But natural disasters like outbreaks, not so much. The White Horse fades. And maybe that's because in war, you can find a beginning, a middle, and an end. You can find responsibility and hang blame on someone. And in war, you can have a semblance of control over the outcome. Try as we might, we can't find a motive for nature. There's no battle of wits, and there's no real end to the fight. We are not in control. We can only react and hope for the best. There's a great line in an excellent but terrifying movie called Contagion. It's probably the most scientifically accurate film about a pandemic that's ever been made. One character, who's a member of Homeland Security, is grilling one of the scientists about the possibility of this mystery disease falling into enemy hands. Now, of course, this disease is killing people everywhere in the world, but he can only think in terms of good guys and bad guys. It's the only logic left. He asks, can someone weaponize this avian flu? The scientist looks at him and says, you don't have to weaponize the avian flu. The birds are already doing it. But hey, you know what the really good news is? Most of the time, we have a good symbiotic relationship with the microbes on this planet. And even though there have been epidemics and pandemics, they are few and far between. And we are resilient little bastards. We just might need to realize that there is no real top of the food chain. And I don't know, if that isn't enough to cheer you up, let's try this. The flu shot is only $14.99 at Costco. And thanks for listening to my show. I'd love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. And I've also updated my Hellbent for Horror website, hellbentforhorror.com. You can download every episode directly from there, read any newsletters, and you can go to any of my social websites and emails all from the homepage. You can IM me on my Facebook page at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and you can find me on Twitter at hellbenthorror. A lot of the great conversations I have with fans happens on Twitter at hellbenthorror. Now, for you, the listeners of Hellbent for Horror, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/hellbentforhorror. If you like the show and you're curious about audiobooks, sign up for the service through Hellbent for Horror. It helps make this podcast sustainable for me. I thank you in advance. And thank you for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can now subscribe to the Hellbent for Horror podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player FM, and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. It really helps. Till next time, stay hellbent.